Hey YouTubers, welcome back to As Above, So Mid-Mo. Today we're going to be learning how to make a triangle loom. Uh, I'm having to voice over this video. I just got a new microphone and this is one of the first videos that I've made, so I recorded all this stuff with my fancy new microphone hooked up, and then I realized that it wasn't recording my voice, so here I am. Sorry about that. Hopefully I can get the message across just as good, but anyways, today, like I said, we're making a triangle loom. What I got in my hand here is one that I started making a few days ago out of maple. The one beside me on the table there is made out of mahogany. I would advise you strongly to work with one of these softer woods to begin with. Um, what I'm going to be doing in this video is with oak, and I didn't mean to do that, but I say that just because if you haven't done a lot of woodworking, oak is extremely strong. It's very difficult to hammer a nail into, put a screw into. It's a very strong wood, and you can get away with a lot more with these softer woods, maple, mahogany. So I would advise that for uh, for getting started. And I get my wood, any lumber store get you a 1x2 or 1x1 or 2x2, whatever works for you. I don't really see it necessary to go too much bigger than that. You're just sort of wasting wood at that point. As long as it's wide enough that when you put your screws in the corners, it doesn't split, you are golden. This piece I've got in my hand is maple, and I already sanded it down and uh, filled it with wood glue and kind of cleaned it up. And that's what we're going for today. We're just going to worry about making the wooden triangle, and we're not going to get into the finished product just yet. I'm cheating here. The one that I made that's on the drill press there, I went ahead and wrote down the dimensions for it. I used them for that maple in there, and I'm using them right now as we speak. I wrote them on my table. Basically, it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I find the measurement of the hypotenuse, the longer side, and then I do the math from there and figure out the length of the shorter sides. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. You don't have to be perfect about it, but it's good to get pretty close. As close as you can, anyway. But I just do it one piece at a time. That's all you can do. I don't worry about cutting the angles just yet. I just cut it straight on through. I believe my sides are somewhere around 6.3 inches, and the hypotenuse of these guys are right around 9 inches. It's important that both of your sides are as close to symmetrical as possible. You don't want one side longer than the other. That'll throw your measurements off big time. Just the smallest little difference can really show later on. But like I said, I don't worry about cutting the angles right off the bat. I just cut my rough cut my boards, and I'll worry about getting the angles here in a sec. And if it helps you guys, you don't have to do this, but you can always put a line on there so you can see, give you a good precise edge to cut with instead of just putting a little mark on there if you want to go for precision. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Just depends on how I'm feeling that day, I guess. And again, if your pieces are shorter than one another, it's okay if it's shorter than 6.3. It's okay if it's longer. You just really want them to both be the same. That's the most important part. I saved you guys the trouble of finding the measurements, if you do want to use this size loom, it's 9 inches on the hypotenuse, the long side, and about 6.3 give or take on the sides, each side 6.3. I was probably telling you guys something real important there, but I can't remember what. There we go, we got the sides cut, we're going to cut the hypotenuse. Okay, got our pieces all cut. Now we can hone in on getting our angles cut. It's important at this point to sort of get a mental picture or even write on your pieces which piece goes where, and make sure that you are being mindful of your angles. You don't want to cut one angle on one end of the board and the wrong angle on the other end of the board. You can really end up with a wasted piece of wood. Well, you can always use it for something else, but what I like to do here is, instead of what I'm showing you there, I like to go for a more precise 45-degree angle at the meeting down there of the 90-degree angle. Instead of overlapping it, that's a personal preference. I find it easier for myself to go that route. I think it looks better, and it can help you to mark on your wood again where the angles need to go. And what I'm showing you here is I cut the corners off just for aesthetics, purely for aesthetics. There's really no point in doing that other than I think it looks good. So you can leave the hypotenuse just a solid piece without cutting any angles in it. There's no problem there with that at all. My first couple of ones I made, I did that. I just see these as sort of art in themselves that can create art, so I try to make them look a little more aesthetically pleasing. And again, here what I'm doing is I'm sort of marking the wood just to get an idea of where my angles need to be and which direction to cut so I don't mess up and cut the wrong angle on one end of the board. Here we've got our angles cut, and we are going to get ready to start putting stuff together. And if it makes you feel better, you can use your carpenter's square if you've got it, and you can wedge it up in between your angle there and see how good your saw is at cutting an angle, or see how good you are at setting it up to cut the right angle. Here there's a little bit of wiggle room. It's not perfect, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's like Bob Ross said, it can be our little secret, our little happy mistakes. Like I said, here again, I cut off the corners for no purpose other than aesthetics. I think it looks cool. Looks kind of like Superman or a diamond. Makes it look a little more valuable, eh? One thing to note here is that when you do cut the corners off, you lose a small amount of real estate. If you had your full hypotenuse, you could go out just a little bit further with your nails on top. But again, I mean, you're losing half inch maybe. So if you want that half inch, by all means, don't cut the corners and get the full shebang. But otherwise, you can make it look however you want. I'm just laying down the guidelines for you guys, hoping you find something useful out of this. So here we go, I got my angle cut on my hypotenuse, and now we're going to get ready to drill our pilot holes and get everything locked down. Again, I was probably telling you something that you needed to hear, but can't remember what. Ah, yeah, this thing. It is helpful. You've got a bigger piece of wood, but the issue is that when you're drilling your holes to secure this 90-degree angle, you want to go horizontally with it. I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. Get your drill bit. And what you want to do is make sure that your drill bit's not going to be bigger than your actual screw. You don't want your drill bit to be wider than your screw. You can't really see it that well, but it's just a little bit smaller. There we go. It's just a little bit smaller. And the reason I'm using such a big drill bit's again because I'm working with oak, and I've tried doing it with a smaller drill bit, and you really need to just about as much drilled out as you can get, still having your screw eat into some wood a little bit. If you drill a hole much smaller than that with oak, good luck getting anything in there. That stuff is tough. And here, this is where I was saying that tool, I haven't quite figured it out just yet. You don't want to drill that direction because when you put your screw in, it tends to pull it to one side or the other, and it kind of it makes it uneven. I can't really describe that well. You want to drill it in horizontally. See, it shifts like that if you don't screw it in horizontally. That can really mess up the whole thing if you don't get your 90-degree angle correct. So you want to screw it in horizontally, just like the screw's laying there, so it pulls equally on both sides instead of pulling to one side or the other. And unfortunately, this tool doesn't allow for me to get in there and drill it horizontally. And even with it clamped down as tight as you can in that thing, if you drill it unequally on one side, the screw will end up pulling the wood and creating a fitting that's not quite even. And that's where it really is a little more important to be as precise as you can on that 90 degree. You want both sides to be the same length, and you want that fitting to be just about as good as possible. So what I'm doing here instead, I'm going to use this adjustable C clamp, whatever you call it. Hold down one piece, and then I'll hold the other piece with my hand. I'll pull it to the edge of the table a little bit so I can get in there easier with the drill. Cinch it down pretty good. You don't want that sucker running away on you. Here we go, we're drilling horizontally. Remember, we're going equal parts through. And it's also important here to note you want to be mindful of the length of your screw. If your screw is longer than the width you plan to screw together, what's going to happen is you're going to have the sharp part of your screw poking out on the other end. And then you've got a big hole in your wood on the other side and a pokey piece of metal in the way. That's really difficult to clean up. Kind of, if you're picky like me, you kind of sort of have to sacrifice that one and start over. I'm sure there's an alternative. Not for me. But you do want to make sure that your hole that you're drilling is long enough. Otherwise, you'll have the issue of, especially with oak, not so much with the softer woods, but you'll have the issue where you'll strip your head out, you'll mess up your screw trying to power through, and then you're stuck. So swap drill bits here. This little guy I'm about to show you is a lifesaver. Not that thing. What I'm about to tell you does that. It digs out a little hole for the screw. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you run the risk of driving your screw right on in and splitting the wood. So what this little lifesaver does, it's got a little what, I don't know what you call it, but it's a regular drill bit on the end, as you can see, but right there it digs. It digs a little beveled hole out that's right about the same shape as your screw head. So what happens is you run that drill bit all the way in, and then it digs a little hole, and then your screw can sit right down in that hole, and you don't have to worry about your wood splitting or anything like that. It's easier to fill afterwards. You can see here I filled that one in with, I believe I filled that with caulking, but I wouldn't recommend that. I just use some wood putty. You can see in the bottom left corner there in that yellow tub. Stuff works pretty good, and it's really easy to sand down. That caulking doesn't sand down very easily. So anyways, after I drilled my initial pilot hole, now I'm going to follow through that pilot hole with this fancy lifesaver drill bit, and I'll push it in, I don't know, about a 1/4 inch or so, just enough that I can bury my screw head in the wood without it sticking out. You really don't want it to be flush either, because then you can't fill that hole in with anything. But again, it's personal preference. You can do whatever you want. Don't worry about the wood or the splinter sticking up there. Unless you got soft hands, then you might want to be a little careful. Might wear gloves or something like that. So since we got the hole drilled, we're going to go ahead and pop on the Phillips head drill bit. Put a screw in that so it's stable, stays together, and then that way we can get a better idea of where we need to drill our holes for the last piece, the hypotenuse. And even when you do drill it horizontally, you still need to be a little bit cautious when you're ramming that screw in there, because you can still end up pulling your wood from too far to one side or the other. But you can see that's pretty flush. It's not perfect, but that edge that's just a little bit off, you can go back and sand that down. It's wonderful what you can do with a sander. You can really make it look good afterwards, even if you got some angles that didn't quite match up just right. Later on, once we get our holes drilled and our screws in there, we'll go back and fill her up with some wood glue, or you can use caulking, or you can use whatever you want. It just kind of fills those gaps in if you did end up with any. Sometimes I end up with gaps, and sometimes I do really good and avoid that. This time I didn't and avoid it. I ended up with a few gaps. And sometimes it's just because of the wood itself. Sometimes the board gets a little twisted. Other times I don't quite get the setting on the saw set just right. Clamp down. It's good to at least have one side clamped down, or have a real time getting your wood to stay still. That stuff likes to run away. Let me tell you. Here, what I'm doing is I'm just marking where I want it. I'm just kind of drawing a line to show where I want it, and that way if it does jumble around on me, I can put it back real easy without having to think too hard. I guess I'm thinking. Here, it's important to note again the angle at which you put the screw in there. If you put it in like that, it's going to poke through the side. You don't really want that sharp pokey thing sticking through the side of your wood. So what I end up doing is I drive it right down the middle um, from the corner there. And this is where cutting the corners off the hypotenuse kind of come to bite you in the butt. You run out of wood to use to screw in the corners. But again, I like the way it looks, so I deal with it. It's also important, I should say this, that you want to put the holes you're drilling slightly lower than the middle. Let's say this is the top that I'm working on here. You want to put the holes slightly below the middle of the board, because when you get to putting your nails in, if you got your screw too far up and it's going right down the line of your nails, when you go to driving your nails in, you'll hit your screw and you won't be able to drive them in all the way. Well, that really is a huge bummer to find out after you've already put in the work to make your wooden triangle. So to avoid that, and I should have told you that before I drilled in the 90-degree angle there, but we'll just hope that we don't hit any screws. But just drill slightly below the middle, just to give you some room to drive those nails in a little bit without hitting the screws. And it's not a big deal, you can still get them in there quite a ways, but you do want your nails to be evenly hammered in. I'm telling you, this oak is not easy stuff to work with. It probably would help to have some sharp drill bits. I'm damn near giving it my all there. That's what the dentist was doing on me a couple of weeks ago. And I got my Lifesaver drill bit back on there. Gonna drill that little hole out, just about a 1/4 inch or so, just enough to get your screw down in there. Looks like I'm going to go ahead and put a screw in there. Might as well, eh? And see, how close I am to the edge of the wood there. Had I tried to put a screw in there without that fancy little drill bit, it would have split for sure, no doubt. You don't have to have that thing. I can't remember what it's called. It's in the drill bit section in any hardware store, but most bigger hardware stores. And that sure is a lifesaver. Because when you split the wood, it makes it much less stronger. Doesn't look as good. It's a bummer. But like Bob Ross said, we're all happy mistakes. Except you can't paint over that. You can fill it in with wood glue and caulk and wood filler. Here we go, dentist mode. Trying to pull out a molar or something. Okay, so I got that screw in. And it's not super perfect, but again, it doesn't have to be. It's a little bit off. But again, we can go back and sand that down. Not a problem. Here I'm just reminding myself which side's which. I think I wrote top on there. Just a reminder to put your screws slightly off center towards one side, top or bottom. And also pay attention to which side is top and bottom and make sure you don't put one screw towards the top and one towards the bottom. I've done that a couple of times. That's always fun. And here I'm telling you to make sure when you're drilling your pilot hole that you're going right through the middle of that thing so you don't go the wrong direction and have it come out one side or the other. You want your screw to be right in the middle of that piece of wood. It helps avoid splitting too. Drilling your pilot holes really helps to prevent splitting. The reason I decided to start making these was my girlfriend and I were in a little yarn shop outside of Columbia, Missouri a few months ago, and the lady in there was showing us her looms and a lot of her hand-dyed yarns and wool that hadn't been spun yet. And she sat down and showed us how to weave on these right triangle looms, and we were so excited. It was so easy. It was super quick. It didn't use half as much yarn as knitting or crocheting does. And we were going to get one, but they were so expensive. We just couldn't justify it, and I couldn't justify it. You know, it's a couple of pieces of wood, 3 screws, and a handful of nails. I thought that maybe I could give it a shot. Here we go. You can see some imperfections. My angles, they ain't perfect, but they're close enough. Nothing a little sander can't fix. You get a little handheld power sander, you can make that sucker look like Cadillac. Polish her up real good. Yeah, they were a little too expensive for my blood. I think I paid. Now oak is expensive. I think oak's one of the more expensive pieces of wood. That piece I got. Oh, I'd say it was about 10 or 15 bucks just for one piece of wood. But a loom that size on the internet or at that store was running about 60, 70 bucks. So I figured an hour or two worth of time and 10 bucks. And you can dig up some nails somewhere and a couple of screws, slap that together, maybe 20 bucks altogether. assuming you got the tools. And this isn't necessary. You don't have to put wood glue in there. I'm doing that because my joints weren't perfect and I want something in those cracks to fill it up just for aesthetics. Again, I don't like there being gaps in between the wood. I don't think it looks as good, so I'll be pretty liberal with that wood glue too. I want to make sure it fills the cracks. You can see I left the screws in the wood just so it's a little easier to put it back together. And also, this is another important reason to mark each piece of wood as top and bottom, just so you, in case you forget which way it goes, you can be sure that everything lines back up. Of course, you'd figure it out, but again, the wood glue's not necessary yet. Those screws are in there and they're strong enough. I mean, all you're doing is weaving on this. You're not throwing it at a brick wall, hopefully, or running it over with your car, or dropping it from a 10-story building, so you shouldn't have to worry about it coming apart with those screws in there. But I like it to look good. I like to have it to look like one piece as best that I can. When you're screwing it back together, you put that much wood glue in there, it's gonna ooze some glue out. So be prepared for that. Good thing about it, it's wood glue, so once it dries, it dries fairly clear, and you can sand that stuff down, no problem. No problem. But make sure you got everything looking as good as you can before you glue it, because you can't take it back apart after that. Not very easily, anyway. If you don't like big puddles of goop on there, you can get a piece of cardboard or a little piece of wood or something like that and scrape off the extra. Not necessary, again, you can sand that down. Anyways, that's it, guys. That's how you make the right triangle part of it. So thank you for tuning in and checking this out. We'll get around to marking it and going through the process of getting the nails put in there. So thank you, guys.